Hello, this is Max. Watch how a young man, after losing loved ones, becomes the hero of the town, adored by everyone except his girlfriend's father. Don't forget to subscribe. The movie's opening scene introduces us to a young boy named Peter Parker, who walks into his father's study room to find the desk in disarray. His father quickly gathers some important documents and leaves with the family. Peter's parents drop him off at his Uncle Ben and Aunt May's house without providing any explanation. The story then fast-forwards a few years, and we find Peter in high school. He is portrayed as intelligent but introverted, trying to avoid trouble. Despite his efforts, he is bullied by a classmate named Flash and his friends. One day, Peter intervenes when he sees Flash bullying an innocent student. This action results in Peter getting beaten up. However, another classmate, Gwen Stacy, steps in to stop the fight. She praises Peter for his courage, which brings a smile to his face. Later that evening, while Peter and Uncle Ben are cleaning the basement, Peter discovers his father's briefcase. Upon examining it, he finds some documents and goes through them. These papers reveal that his father used to work at Oscorp with a scientist named Dr. Kurt Connors. Peter decides to research more about his father's work and learns that it involved cross-species genetics. Additionally, he discovers news about his parents' tragic death in a plane crash. The following day, Peter decides to visit Oscorp to learn more about his father and his work. To gain access, he steals the identity of a random student and poses as an intern. While at Oscorp, he encounters Gwen Stacy, a senior intern who is working under Dr. Kurt Connors. Gwen notices Peter and asks why he's there. Peter, trying to maintain his cover, tells her that he's interested in science. Gwen doesn't expose his real identity but warns him to be cautious. As Peter explores Oscorp, he bumps into a man carrying documents bearing the same symbols he signed his father's papers. Peter decides to follow this man and ends up in a biocable development unit. Inside, he observes an experiment involving genetically modified radioactive spiders. Out of curiosity, Peter accidentally disrupts the experiment, causing the spiders to fall onto him. One of the spiders bites him on the neck. Later, on the subway ride home, Peter is confronted by a gang of bullies. To his surprise, he discovers that he has gained superhuman abilities, including increased strength, acute senses, agility, and speed. He easily dodges the bullies' attacks. Back at home, Peter examines himself in the mirror and discovers a radioactive spider still attached to his neck. The next morning, Peter realizes that he has developed spider-like powers. He decides to visit Dr. Connors and reveals his father's name, Richard. Dr. Connors shares that he and Richard were working on cross-species genetics to regrow lost limbs, as Dr. Connors had lost his right limb in an accident. Peter and Dr. Connors plan to meet again to discuss their research the following day. Meanwhile, at school, Flash continues to bully other students. He spills ink on an innocent girl's work, prompting Peter to come to her aid. When Flash retrieves a basketball, Peter catches it impressively, surprising everyone. However, a tussle with Flash leads to Peter breaking the basketball board. Uncle Ben is called to the school, and he expresses disappointment in Peter, especially after learning about his previous bullying behavior. Before leaving, Uncle Ben reminds Peter of his father, Richard, who believed in the importance of fulfilling one's obligations. After school, Peter goes to Oscorp to meet Dr. Connors. On his way there, he practices his newfound parkour skills. At Oscorp, Dr. Connors tests the limb regeneration process on mice using the formula provided by Peter. To their amazement, the formula works. Upon returning home, Peter finds Uncle Ben waiting for him. He realizes that he forgot to pick up Aunt May, leading to a stern conversation with Uncle Ben about responsibility and obligations. Peter, still upset and angry, tells Uncle Ben that there's no point in talking about responsibility since his father is no longer with him. He storms out of the house in a fit of rage. Aunt May tries to intervene, suggesting they leave Peter alone for a while, but Uncle Ben decides to follow him. Peter heads to a convenience store to buy a bottle of milk, but he realizes he doesn't have enough money. At that moment, a man behind him robs the store and attempts to flee. Uncle Ben, who has been searching for Peter, spots the thief and tries to stop him. Tragically, during the confrontation, the thief shoots Uncle Ben, and Peter arrives at the scene just a moment too late. Uncle Ben succumbs to his injuries, leaving Peter devastated as his uncle was not only a father figure but also his only friend in life. This traumatic event becomes a turning point in Peter's life and shapes his future as Spider-Man. The next day at school, Flash approaches Peter, but to Peter's surprise, Flash is there to commiserate with him over Uncle Ben's death. Gwen also tries to console Peter with a hug, but he remains troubled and haunted by his loss. Later that night, while walking through the streets, Peter comes across a criminal gang. Fueled by anger over his uncle's death, he confronts them and uses his newly acquired parkour skills. During this encounter, he discovers that he has wall-crawling abilities. This event inspires him to take on the criminal underworld in search of the thief who killed Uncle Ben. Along the way, he also intervenes in numerous crimes, becoming a local hero. During one of these encounters, Peter falls into an abandoned wrestling ring and finds a wrestler's face mask. This discovery gives him the idea to conceal his identity, so he creates a mask for himself. Peter, with his intelligence and resourcefulness, designs a spandex suit and attaches self-designed web shooters, becoming the vigilante known as Spider-Man. His super abilities and crime-fighting efforts gain the attention of the public, who start referring to him as Spider-Man. The police, led by Captain George Stacy, Gwen's father, believe that Spider-Man is taking the law into his own hands and start actively searching for him. Meanwhile, Peter continues his crime-fighting activities as Spider-Man. One evening, while dealing with a thief, the police confront him at gunpoint. However, Spider-Man manages to escape quickly using his web-swinging abilities. On the other hand, Dr. Connors is under pressure from his superior, Dr. Ajit Ratha, to start a human trial for their limb regeneration experiment, with the hope of benefiting people in need. Dr. Connors, concerned about the risks involved, refuses to proceed with human trials. In response, Dr. Ratha fires Dr. Connors and seizes the limb regeneration drug formula. Later, in a state of depression and desperation, Dr. Connors injects himself with the experimental drug. To his amazement, his lost limb regenerates, but the drug has a profound and unexpected effect on him, transforming him into a large reptilian monster. Now transformed, Dr. Connors, in his monstrous form, sets out in search of Dr. Ratha, presumably to confront him or seek revenge for his dismissal and the seizure of the drug formula. Peter is invited to Gwen's house for dinner, and during the meal, Captain George Stacy expresses his strong disapproval of Spider-Man and predicts that the vigilante will soon be arrested. Peter, feeling the need to defend Spider-Man's actions, describes him as a public servant rather than a criminal. This leads to tension between Peter and Captain Stacy. After dinner, Peter and Gwen go to the terrace for some privacy. There, Peter shocks Gwen by revealing his secret identity as Spider-Man. He confesses his love for her and kisses her. While they share this moment, Captain Stacy receives an emergency call and departs, prompting Peter to follow him. Peter arrives at the Williamsburg Bridge, where he witnesses the reptilian monster throwing cars off the bridge. He quickly changes into his Spider-Man costume and uses his web shooters to save the cars and their occupants. Upon Spider-Man's arrival, Dr. Connors retreats. During the rescue, Spider-Man learns that a child is trapped in a car above. Without hesitation, he enters the submerged vehicle and comforts the frightened child, eventually gaining the child's trust and successfully rescuing him. The police subsequently take over the situation and issue an arrest warrant for Spider-Man, much to Peter's dismay. He is saddened by the turn of events, as he only wishes to use his abilities to help those in need. Later, Peter visits Dr. Connors at his cabin to inquire about the giant reptile. Dr. Connors, who appears unwell and overwhelmed, explains that the monster can become aggressive when threatened. He pretends to be preoccupied with a new project, keeping his true transformation a secret from Peter. Meanwhile, Peter notices a vial of the drug on Dr. Connors' table, leading him to realize that Dr. Connors has injected himself with the formula. In the next scene, Peter goes to the police station to try and explain the truth to Captain George Stacy. He claims that Dr. Connors attempted to regrow his lost limb using lizard DNA, resulting in an imbalance that transformed him into a giant lizard. However, Captain George remains skeptical of Peter's cross-genetic story and dismisses his claims. Undeterred, Peter decides to confront the colossal lizard on his own. He ventures into the sewer and sets up a camera to gather evidence. Dr. Connors once again mutates into a massive lizard and attacks Peter in the sewer, leading to an intense battle. Peter's web shooters suddenly stop working, leaving him vulnerable to the lizard's attacks. However, Peter manages to escape. Dr. Connors discovers the camera with Peter's name on it, realizing that Spider-Man is, in fact, Peter Parker. Meanwhile, Peter goes to Gwen's room and she helps him treat his wounds. During their conversation, Peter reveals that he's responsible for Dr. Connors' transformation because he provided the limb regeneration formula. The following day, Dr. Connors arrives at Peter's school, causing panic among the students. He attacks Peter, but Peter uses his web shooters to evade the lizard's attacks and fight back. The battle continues throughout the school until Dr. Connors flees just before the police arrive. Peter asks Gwen to retrieve the antidote from the Oscorp laboratory while he heads to Dr. Connors' hideout. There, he learns that Dr. Connors intends to disperse a poisonous substance throughout the city using a cloud-generating device at Oscorp Tower. Alarmed by this revelation, he urgently instructs Gwen to leave the lab as Dr. Connors is on his way there. Meanwhile, one police unit is engaged in a battle to stop the lizard, while another unit led by Captain George is determined to apprehend Spider-Man. After a grueling fight, the first police unit eventually manages to subdue the lizard. In the final scenes of the story, it's revealed that the lizard has super healing abilities that quickly infect the other police officers with the limb regenerating drug. Captain George Stacy's team captures Spider-Man and discovers that he is, in fact, Peter Parker. Despite this, Spider-Man manages to convince Captain George to let him go by informing him that the lizard is on its way to Oscorp, where Gwen is retrieving the antidote. Unfortunately, one of the police officers accidentally shoots Peter, injuring his leg, making it difficult for him to move properly and swing through the city. However, the father of the kid whose life Spider-Man saved earlier works in construction and decides to help. He summons all of his employees and directs them to position cranes properly so that Spider-Man can use them to reach the Oscorp Tower. The traffic police also clear the way for him. Gwen retrieves the antidote and gives it to her father, instructing him to deliver it to Spider-Man. Captain George heads to the top of the tower, where Spider-Man is struggling in a battle against the lizard. He starts shooting the lizard and hands over the antidote to Peter, allowing him to climb to the peak and disperse the antidote instead of the limb regeneration drug. However, during this process, the lizard severely injures Captain George. The lizard then approaches Peter, but it's too late, as the antidote process eventually restores the humanity of Dr. Connors and the other infected police officers. The tower collapses, and Peter is about to fall to his death, but a revived Dr. Connors saves him just in time. Peter then goes to Captain George, who is nearing the end of his life. Captain George tells Peter that the city needs Spider-Man but warns him that he will make many enemies. He makes Peter promise to keep Gwen out of all this. From that day onwards, Peter keeps his promise by staying away from Gwen. He doesn't even attend Captain George's funeral. Gwen, realizing Peter's distance and coldness, accepts the situation. In a final scene, Flash approaches Peter at school, acting friendly and revealing a changed demeanor. Flash is even wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt, and Peter compliments it. The story ends with Spider-Man watching some police vans pursuing a criminal, ready to embark on his mission as an official city hero. If you are interested in such films, please proceed to the next video on the screen, and also share your thoughts about this film in the comments. Give us a like and subscribe. Goodbye.